On a recent episode of his hit podcast, The Rest is Politics, Alastair Campbell had a bit of a dig at Novara Media. It was in the context of his co-host Rory Stewart's recent interview with Ash Sarkar.
If I'd have been on Novara Media, I would have said that I do think that the politics that Novara Media pursue in this sort of relentless anti-Keir Starmer, anti-Labour leadership, Jeremy Corbyn, some kind of messiah, is that they overlook the fact that Jeremy Corbyn, you have said this before, partly responsible for Brexit, no doubt about that at all. And also, yes, you can admire him as a kind of, a figure who's been around Parliament for a long time and so forth. But, he didn't lead the Labour Party in a way that took it anywhere in the right direction in terms of actually winning power. And the reason for that is I don't think that's what he ever really wanted.
So there were a number of things I found rather irritating about those claims by Alastair Campbell made about Novara Media. So one of them, Novara Media are obsessed with being anti-Keir Starmer. Now, I would say personally, I don't think I am obsessed with being anti-Keir Starmer. I do think I recognise when he's done a decent job. I mean, I actually think it's quite impressive that he's as far ahead in the polls as he is. What I like to point out on this show is that if we want the situation in this country to improve, if we want public services to be improved, we can't just wave our hands around and say, oh, reform will do it. No, we have to actually tax rich people to get some money to do it. Now, what I'm saying is not actually different from, someone like Andrew Marr on the New Statesman podcast, right? Keir Starmer is saying, we can have growth, we can have better public services, but we're not going to tax the rich anymore and we're not going to borrow any more money. Now, how do you improve public services without taxing the rich or borrowing any more money after 13 years of austerity? Keir Starmer has a critique of austerity, but he doesn't promise to spend any more money on those public services than are being spent after 13 years of austerity. So it doesn't add up, right? So we're just talking about the inconsistency in his logic, and that's not to try and make him lose the next election, right? That's to try and make sure that people genuinely understand what this country needs and don't sort of, it's dishonest, essentially, what Keir Starmer is doing, and it would be bad journalism to suggest it was anything other than that. The other reason I find it frustrating for him to say that is because it's somewhat hypocritical. Now, remember, Alastair Campbell was no fan of Jeremy Corbyn when he was Labour leader, and he didn't exactly shut up about that fact. Now, even worse, it wasn't just that Alastair Campbell was critical of Corbyn in the same way that we are critical of Keir Starmer. No, to my mind, Alastair Campbell started a campaign which had a key role in bringing down not just Corbyn's leadership, but handing the Tory party a massive majority. Now, what am I talking about here? I'm talking about the People's Vote campaign, right? Alastair Campbell radicalised Labour members, radicalised many Remain voters so that they thought the only acceptable outcome would be a People's Vote. That position was forced on the Labour Party. I do have critiques of the Labour Party here as well. I think they should have committed to a soft Brexit back in 2017. They did lead on Remainers, but in any case, that problem for them was massively, massively heightened because of people such as Alastair Campbell, who I think had a huge role in delivering the Tories a massive majority in 2019. So for him to now turn around and say, oh, you're too critical of the Labour leadership, you don't want them to enter government, I think is nonsense. And in fact, I said that to Alastair Campbell in 2019.
I think what you've seen is many people in the People's Vote campaign have tried to target a lot of ire at Jeremy Corbyn. And I think one reason they've done that is to try and rile up his base. So I don't think there is a majority of the public who are in favour of a People's Vote. I don't think there ever will be, actually. So what I see as happening is that some people in the People's Vote, not all of them, there are many people in that campaign who genuinely care about staying in the EU, and all of their decisions are guided by how they best think that can be made to happen. I think there are others who recognise that a People's Vote is unlikely to happen, but this is a great opportunity to try and drive a wedge between Labour's Remain supporters and Jeremy Corbyn by trying to make that he is the one thing standing in the way of us remaining.
I was right, Don't like to say, oh, I was right all along. But in that case, I think it is very clear now that the People's Vote campaign, what it will be remembered for is destroying Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party. There was never a chance really of having a People's Vote. There was never a chance of us overturning what was incredibly popular. Well, let's say it was the biggest turnout ever in a sort of British election, wasn't it? And to just say, oh, we can overturn that. I don't think Alastair Campbell ever believed that it was going to be overturned. He was using that as a wedge to bring down Jeremy Corbyn. And yeah, he's a smart political operator. It worked. But that means I think it's a bit rich when he complains that Novara Media journalists have a critique of Keir Starmer. Are we supposed to suddenly be really, really loyal to a Labour leadership out of I suppose, loyalty to the party when he was a key driver of the project that brought the last Labour leadership down. Also worth noting, Alastair Campbell saying that, well, if I were on Novara Media, I would say XYZ. Aaron today publicly invited Alastair Campbell onto Novara Media to discuss the Iraq War and its consequences. So let's see if he takes up that offer. Then we can see what he actually says when he comes on our channel. Rivka Brown, any thoughts on Alastair Campbell's comments about Novara Media on The Rest is Politics?
He is probably the least likely person to ever step foot in the Novara studio. We've had Rory Stewart. We've had, some right wingers come into the studio and kind of debate with mostly Aaron, because that's his favorite activity. But that's because right wingers have principles and right wingers operate in a kind of generally much more straightforward way. Like, they say what they say and they say it, whereas Alastair Campbell is so much more an evasive and slippery figure in exactly the way that you've just described, like claiming that we're trying to bring down Keir Starmer, when in fact he kind of semi-covertly did exactly the same thing in the form of the people's vote. I think also, him suggesting that we've created this kind of magic grandpa figure. This is not a claim that's exclusive to Alastair Campbell, by the way, in Jeremy Corbyn, is something I think centrists often sort of fall back on. And it's because of their own anxiety about the fact that actually, Jeremy Corbyn didn't win because he was some great charismatic figure. Jeremy Corbyn isn't a particularly charismatic figure, but he won on the strength of his ideas. His ideas, which, by the way, remain incredibly popular in our society, including amongst lots of Conservative voters. Whereas what they're trying to do with Keir Starmer, and we see in the run-up to the conference, which is in a few weeks' time, slapping his enormous meaty face on the cover of the conference programme, is to sort of recreate the culture of personality that that sort of grew up around Tony Blair, but at least had some ideas to sort of give it momentum. Whereas Keir Starmer is literally just a wet wipe. So I think that kind of anxiety about Jeremy Corbyn's popularity amongst left-wingers, including left-wingers who work for Novara Media, boils down to a deep anxiety about the total absence of ideas in their own camp, which relies mostly on underhanded tactics like getting a people's vote through, getting loads of massive donations from businesses to spend on adverts, I don't know, and just kind of stalling for time whilst the Tory party eats itself.
I assume when Jeremy Corbyn won, you mean won the Labour leadership twice, with a significant mandate. So there was clearly a lot more support for the politics of Jeremy Corbyn than the centrists ever imagined. Now they are, they have been ever since 2019, trying to use that defeat as an opportunity to pretend that never happened, that 2017 never happened, that those two leadership elections never happened, and that this was always just a very tiny minoritarian project of a few thousand people who can be dismissed as radical extremists. That's not the case. It's still not.